Venus in Virgo. The Virgo-Pisces polarity, I'll sidetrack. Earlier today when we talked about all of the human-made conditioning and 5,000 years of conditioning with a perfect God out there in the skies judging us, our imperfect humanness, we get imprinted and conditioned with guilt, unconscious, deep levels, atone, anger. That archetype exists in Virgo-Pisces. So both Virgo and Pisces can have this archetype of conditioned guilt due to religious distortions. So both Virgo and Pisces can be caught up in sadomasochism. We tend to have a tendency to want to see Virgo as the sadist and Pisces as the masochism, but it works either way. Or the 6/12. Yes, or the 6/12. So when you have Venus in either Virgo or the 6th, what happened is Leo at the top of the pyramid got flipped upside down, and Virgo sees itself on the bottom of the pyramid. And Virgo is, help me out, passive, mutable earth. Okay, so we've got passive and mutable. And then earth, that physical element. So what this will relate to with that archetype of Virgo is we're finishing up the first half of the zodiac. We reached the apex of self with Leo, and then we started this transition, mutable Virgo, that now has to transition us to then reach the halfway point of the zodiac to go into the second half with others. So Virgo is transitioning from self to others. Pisces is transitioning from others back to self, Aries following Pisces. This is not always clearly expressed in your cookbooks. So Venus in Virgo, in how it typically is expressed, it's typically expressed in all its distortions because of 5,000 years of human-made conditioning. Virgo is self-critical. Virgo's never perfect enough. Virgo has the inferiority complex. This is the 6th house too, okay? So we've got all of these negatives that comes along. You know, earth sign, I can never get it good enough. I can never finish this project. I run up against the deadline and I create a crisis. So this is how Virgo gets known as the crisis, is because of that inferiority complex over not sensing Pisces as the last sign of the zodiac, the 12th house, the potential for perfection. So Venus in Virgo is almost always, you know, it comes through with many distortions. Now, what is the natural expression of Venus in Virgo? Self-forgiveness, self-love. It's taking Venus in Leo or the 5th with all that bravado and fiery busting out of love me, love me, love me. And it's taking it passive back in to Venus going, I know, to Venus going, Venus in Virgo, I gotta love me. And as I like to say it, I have to love me, warts, farts, and all. We have to self-love all of the imperfections because perfection is a process. The biggest thing for Venus and Virgo to figure out is I only get better with practice. I have to practice my love. I have to practice my relationships with others. I have to practice trying out my needs and values. And so Venus has to, natural Venus in Virgo gets in touch with the process of life. Mutable, adaptation, evolving, growing. All your mutable archetypes, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, Pisces, okay? All your mutable archetypes just have to relax into the process. It's what they're good at. Change a little here, change a little there, you know, however it's necessary. Venus in Virgo, because it is an earth sign, here's another area where I think, I'm afraid this chair's going to fall over when I get up into it. Here's another thing that happens with Venus and Virgo. It's an earth sign. And in your happy little cookbooks, they'll tell you that Venus is frigidity, or Venus in Virgo, or Virgo is frigidity. Take away that one. Venus in Virgo can be as sensuous as they come when it is naturally expressed. First of all, they have to get over all the guilt about being sensual Earth. Okay? All of your Earth signs can be sensual, including Capricorn. Okay? So Venus in Virgo has to, or the 6 has to be able to get in touch with the body and the senses and, the ability to just relax into those senses. It's all of that conditioning of separating spirit and flesh instead of recognizing two sides of the same coin. Okay? All right? Does this make sense to people with this? With that? The Pisces polarity is teaching it wholeness, and it's teaching us, we want to look at Pisces as the last sign as being perfection. Pisces is the potential for perfection. Okay, and so that's what Virgo has to learn from Pisces, is that it's only through the effort, through the practice, through the Virgo application that we evolve into perfection, Pisces. Making sense? Now we're going to flip all this around, and I might be able to do it a little faster being as we've been through the first 6 already. So when we put Venus in Libra, or the 7th, this is another natural affinity for Venus, but Venus in Libra is very good at the whole relationship thing. Here's a misnomer about Libra. Many people think that if you've got Libra or the 7th house, it's already balanced. Anybody ever met a two-faced Libra? Ah, you're so nice and sweet. And they turn around and go over there, and you overhear them going, God, that Libra is the extremes of balance, trying to learn balance. And so within the archetype of Libra exists the extremes. That's how it's balancing. And so Libra energy is just not always naturally balanced. And so a Venus in Libra can be the extreme of neediness, or Venus with its ability to sense. Venus, the Venus side of Taurus relates to the senses. The Venus in Libra just evolves that a little bit, and Venus with its ability to relate to senses, Venus in Libra can be quite manipulating. I'm going to manipulate my lover into needing me. Take it back to some of those relationship types that we talked about. This is what's not always known about Libra. And so Libra is active cardinal air. So it's active and it's cardinal and it's air. So you've got that, there's the duality of the air signs again. All right, and so Libra, many of us are used to running into Libra being quite needy, the need to be needed. I want to be in relationship. I'm not complete if I'm not in a relationship. But we're not always recognizing those subtle distortions of that Libran energy, that I'll say just what I need to say. Air sign, I'm very good at, Libras learn that psychology of listening. If I really just listen to that partner and hear what they're like, I know exactly what words to say to get what I need. Okay? But what Libra will do is some of the distortions of Venus in Libra is wanting to have their partner meet their needs versus Venus in Libra going over to Aries and learning how to meet their own needs and learning to have an equality of giving and receiving of needs in the relationship. Whereas Venus in Libra or the 7th house, each partner gets to have their needs met. Each partner gets equality in their relationships. Does this make sense? Understanding this? With that. And so people won't always recognize that Libra can be two-faced. The 7th house, Venus in either one of those, can be two-faced. And any of the archetypes in Libra or the 7th can do that, the duality of air. I'll say what you want me to say rather than what I, Aries, feel like saying. I'll say what you want to, what I think will get me what I want, rather than just being up front and blurting out, this is what I need. Aries, polarity. Is this making sense? Okay. So Venus in Libra has to stand up for their own needs and be upfront about their own needs, rather than either being too shy to speak up about their own needs or being manipulating about their own needs, being afraid. See, this is where Libra, the archetype of Libra, will get to be the chameleon. I can't be who I really want to be, Aries polarity, or you won't like me. Venus in Libra, Venus in the 7th. Okay? And so Libra has to find the courage to be itself alone, independent from Aries, to then come back and be who it truly is, rather than being what I like to call the karma chameleon. Okay? Venus in Scorpio. How do you pronounce that word? The femme fatale? Is that how you pronounce that?
Oh yeah, femme fatale.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how Venus in Scorpio gets to be known. Venus in Scorpio can take all of the Libra distortions and do them even better yet. But when we put Venus in Scorpio or the 8th house, what we have is the natural psychologist. Venus, the psychology of listening. Scorpio is passive fixed water. So it's passive, it attracts it in, okay? All right, got it? And it's fixed, it sustains it. So can you see how Scorpio can just get in its emotional body and just get stuck in that emotional body? Venus in Scorpio will attract what it needs. It is just a magnetizing energy. And some of it comes from, again, water, but it comes from that passive energy. Now, Venus in Scorpio is a great psychologist. Again, Scorpio in the 8th house is naturally ruled by Pluto. Okay? And so Venus can get under the surface. Under the soul has a tendency to exist on mainly unconscious levels. So any energies in Scorpio or the 8th house can just kind of go under the surface. It can go into that unconsciousness. And water's intuitive, and so they can just pick up on things psychologically. So Venus and Scorpios, that's why they're magnetizing. They got very attractive energy to them. And they understand others, so they kind of just know how to shift that energy to just be what they need to be to attract what they need. Now, what we like to say, or I like to say in evolutionary astrology, here's another tidbit to you. Libra is the diversification of relationships, and through the comparison and contrast, we learn who we are and who we are not. So Libra is more the socialization game, the dating game. The intimate partner and marriage point comes at Scorpio. Scorpio, Taurus, 8th house, 2nd house. Taurus in the 2nd house are self-sex. Scorpio in the 8th are sex with others, the merging of sexuality. So now you can understand how that all tends to come in there. Am I going to lose tape, honey?
2 minutes.
Okay. I don't know if I'll get all the way through this. This will be a big archetype as well again. And so anyway, we get to know a Scorpio in the 8th house through the sexual union with another, 2nd half of the zodiac again, okay? And so Venus and Scorpio, they just got this magnetizing energy to go into relationships and into sexuality. And so the distortions of Venus and Scorpio or the 8th is they're going to have sex, so they're going to manipulate sex for the relationship. They're going to use the manipulation of sex, be it withdrawal, withholding, or, being the femme fatale and the prostitute and everything else that you want to put in there with some of the distortions that start to come in. So Venus in Scorpio has to go over to that polarity Taurus and go, wait a minute, I had to take care of my own needs so that I'm less codependent in a relationship. So both Libra and Scorpio can get some codependency in them. And I've watched neediness in Libra, and I've watched some real interesting codependencies in Scorpio. The type of codependency that where then your cookbook words of obsessive compulsive start to come in, okay? That's the degree of codependency when Scorpio doesn't have its Taurian self-reliance. Venus and Scorpio could be a subject we could talk upon for hours, or Venus in the 8th. Again, because of Scorpio and the 8th house relationship to sexuality that we would know as merging with another, all right? So I'm just trying to see if I, any questions on Venus and Scorpio? Again, unhealthy Venus and Scorpio or the 8th house, the distorted parts of it, gets into, you can get into all kinds of relationship distortions, relationship inequalities. Venus and Scorpio or the 8th can be very manipulative, obsessive, compulsive, codependent, all of those types of things that we read about in the distortions of relationships. Those 5 relationship types, counselor, counselee, student, teacher, the sadomasochistic, the codependent, any of those relationship types can be found with Venus and Scorpio or the 8th house. When Venus and Scorpio learns how to access over to Taurus in the 2nd house, the polarities of that, if they are willing to work on self-reliance and self-sufficiency, learning how to meet their own needs, then Scorpio, or the Venus and Scorpio or the 8th house metamorphoses in to all of the healthy parts of it. They turn the distortions of sexuality into spiritual sexuality. They turn it into the bonding from karma mates to soul mates. They turn it into all of the highest ways that you can see Scorpio and the 8th house. That type of a Venus can turn into the healer on sexual levels and helping the woundedness of the partner heal. They can, they can turn it into all of the ancient ways we used to know the goddess energy, in which sexuality or the sexual act itself is rejuvenating. They turn it into tantric yoga, tantric sexuality. Not the patriarchal kind, but the matriarchal kind, which is life-giving and renewing. This is a huge subject, and I'm only going to be able to touch upon that. But that's the whole evolution of Scorpio when it accesses the Taurus and 2nd house polarity. All right? Venus and Sagittarius are the 9th house. Sagittarius is active, mutable, fire. Back to the fire signs. And so Venus in Sag, I mean, this is the fun-loving party girl, is what I want to say, but it can be the guys too. This is the one who wants to go off and have adventure. Let's have fun. Let's go find the greener grass. Let's go see what excitement we can create. Fire. Venus in Sag, or the 9th, wants to have the deep philosophical meanings and understandings in their relationships. The further along you go in the zodiac with Venus in the signs or the houses, the more they're trying to expand naturally just because we do it through the zodiac. And so Venus and Sag can be very fun-loving. There are many times you're attracted to Venus and Sag or the 9th house because of the lightness and spontaneity. What can be distortions with Venus and Sag or the 9th is that they can be very fickle. Here today, gone tomorrow. If it's not exciting and fun, fire, adios, mutable, I'm out of here. And so some of the other distortions of Venus and Sag of the ninth is that they can, okay, I got to bring it back into my left brain again, or the detail. They can be the Pollyanna types, not wanting to put their feet on the ground. They can be the compensators. They can be the liars in relationships, just like Gemini. The Gemini-Sag polarity, the third, ninth, has to deal with honesty versus lies. And so that Venus and Sag of the ninth, well, they'll gloss over the details, polarity Mercury, or polarity Gemini. And so they find themselves generalizing, compensating, not being honest. Sag and the ninth relate to the right brain. They're Jupiter ruled. And well, I think this is what happened yesterday. And what they have to learn how to do to access that Gemini polarity is to be in the truth of their life. They have to get back into the details. They have to get back into looking at it from one point of view. Because Sag and the ninth house relate to philosophy and the right brain. That's where Venus is. And so Sagittarius has to learn the relativity of truth from Gemini. Sagittarius distorted, the ninth house distorted, becomes the preacher instead of the teacher. So just like Gemini, Venus and Sag of the ninth can be the know-it-all. And I'll say what I have to say to, get you to do whatever I want to do to meet my own needs. And so they have to learn that relativity of any situation, and that there's many viewpoints of looking at things, and that people can have different values. People can have different needs in relationships, and it's okay. People don't have to be the same. Sagittarius will want to make one size fit all as well. Does it make sense? What I'm saying? Okay, moving on. Venus in Capricorn at the 10th. This is moving into, let's get this, passive. I'm passive again, right? Yeah. Passive, cardinal, earth. Losing track of my actives and passives. And so, again, Capricorn is passive, cardinal, earth. So just like Cancer was passive and cardinal, you're now seeing how Capricorn is passive and cardinal, but now it's earth instead of water. And so Venus in Capricorn, or the 10th house, the archetype of Cancer and Capricorn, Cancer feminine, Capricorn masculine, they're both the parents, but Capricorn especially will come through. Venus in Capricorn, or the 10th house, they come out of the womb responsible. And they can, the typical with Capricorn, 10th, suppressions can be suppressing our own needs when Venus is there. And feeling guilty over our own needs. So we get over, Venus in Capricorn in the 10th, we get overly responsible. We're going to meet everybody else's needs before ours. Values, we take on all the conditioning of everybody else's values rather than our own. Venus in Capricorn of the 10th is just as sensitive as when it's in Cancer in the 4th. Only Cancer in the 4th access it really easily. Capricorn in the 10th, it's buried. Venus in Capricorn of the 10th really have to sit still and ponder, how do I really feel about this? And allow those deep feelings to come up underneath the surface into reality. And so the polarity for Venus in Capricorn in the 10th is to recognize that they have emotional needs just like everybody else. That they have a right to be just as vulnerable as the Cancer 4th polarity. That they don't always have to be in charge. Here's one of the things about the Capricorn 10th house archetype. Because it's ruled by Saturn, authority, conditioning, being in charge, being in control. And that Capricorn archetype will sometimes want to be able to lose control. Only it's the scariest thing there is for them. So they'll undermine themselves and they'll create it in distorted ways. So Venus in Capricorn or the 10th needs to have very safe and secure boundaries. When you have Venus in either Cancer, Capricorn, 4th or 10th, one of the ways to unlock that energy is non-sexual touching. And if you find any of the distortions around sexuality with Venus in any of those archetypes, they are going to have to literally go through things as simple as holding hands without it meaning anything else. They have to reestablish safety in touch. Both Venus in Cancer or the 4th and Venus in Capricorn in the 10th. And this will lend itself to other archetypes as well. Okay? So that polarity Cancer of feeling extremely vulnerable is what, and getting in touch with the vulnerability of the emotional body, is actually what is necessary for Venus in Capricorn or the 10th to be able to heal. And so sometimes they'll get emotional shocks to get them in touch with their own values and needs.
What's an emotional shock?
Emotional shock? You're going, a spouse dies, a parent dies, a love affair by your partner and it's exposed to you. Typical for Venus in Capricorn in the 10th, because they're trying to suppress their needs. They try to suppress that emotional body, so the Cancer 4th polarity will just bring out those emotions and blow it to pieces. So then they have to reevaluate Venus, what it really is important to them. Typical thing with Venus in Capricorn or the 10th, the partner can go out and have a love affair. It's found out, especially like if they have Venus, the partner has Venus in Leo or the 5th, that's exposed to get attention. And the Venus in Capricorn or the 10th can just try and pretend it's no big deal. Pretend like they weren't hurt. The partner could say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, please take me back, it won't happen again. And the Venus in Capricorn of the 10th takes them back, and 2 years later it happens again. So it's, and so Venus in Capricorn in the 10th, there is a need to have that emotional maturity rather than emotional suppression. But you've got to go back and experience all of the emotional hurts and wounds and heal them for then Venus in Capricorn in the 10th to be mature and to actually acknowledge and honor their needs and values. Does this make sense?
Yeah, so the distortion is, you just repeat this.
The distortions of Venus in Capricorn or the 10th can be suppressing of their needs, denying them, being overly responsible and taking care of everybody else's needs versus their own, adopting the values of everyone else, or being conditioned by society. This is what society says I should value, so this is what I do, rather than their own values. And when Venus in Capricorn or the 10th gets distorted and doesn't honor their own values, what will come along is depression. I'm trying to do what society says, but it doesn't feel good, so I get bummed. Okay? Typical thing with the archetype of Saturn, Capricorn, and the 10th, conformity. And when we're trying to conform rather than liberate and individuate when we want to, we will get depressed. Venus in Aquarius, or the 11th house. This is a very, very interesting archetype. The archetype of Aquarius in the 11th house is to decondition and break free. And many times Venus in Aquarius, or the 11th, they're into the Aquarian detachment, but they're not going over to the Leo polarity and experiencing me themselves. So Venus in Aquarius, or the 11th, the archetype of that, there's usually, there's three main variations to it. There is Aquarius not being able to break free from Capricorn. So we're stuck in the conformities and defending the past. Or the part of Aquarius in the 11th that is just avant-garde, rebelling all over the place. Or the part of Aquarius in the 11th that just is ebbing and flowing in the middle and not really in the past or the future, just kind of going with the flow. Only instead of again, Aquarius, that part of the air signs, the duality of the air, that we mentioned earlier, the part of Aquarius that gets into the group or the crowd or what my partner needs and not paying attention to what they need. And so they'll also set up Aquarian shock and trauma to get them into their body. Aquarius, Venus in Aquarius, or the 11th house, can, because it is, okay, here we are again, active fixed air. They can get caught up in their head a lot of the time. It's the last of the air signs. So they're caught up in their heads and thinking, this is what I value, this is what I need, and they're going along with, again, they can even be in an alternative group of people. This is what will happen to Venus and Aquarius. Oh, I'm just into free love and, no boundaries and everybody being able to do what they want. And they run into a partner, and all of a sudden the partner's out with somebody else, and it hurts. Leo, what about me? So Venus in Aquarius, or the 11th, will experience some of those shocks to go to the Leo polarity. What about me? Wait a minute. These are my needs, not the group's needs. Okay? Not the group that's trying to get me to conform, to defend the past, not the group that's out there in the avant-garde into free love, and not the group that can't make up their mind and is just, floating back and forth and ebbing and flowing by the current fad. Venus in Aquarius, or the 11th, has to individuate to be a group of one. That's the natural evolution of Venus in Aquarius, or the 11th. These are my values and needs, and if they're different from everybody else's, it doesn't matter. Leo has to come in and spark the individualization, spark self from Aquarius being in the group too much, in its head too much, without paying attention to how the body feels about it.
Trying to interpret this with the cookbook thing. If you have Venus in Aquarius, then would they sort of be an aloof in their relationships?
Yes.
Mentally aloof?
Yes, yes. And you sparked something in me. One of the things that can happen when you have a lot of planets in either Aquarius or the 11th house, from evolutionary astrology, this is a signature for shock and trauma. It's a signature for PTSD. And when I email the article, it'll go into more depth for some of you in learning this Aquarian archetype. But Aquarius following Capricorn, 11th house following 10th house. Capricorn and the 10th are, the conformity, the rules that we have to make that are necessary to function as a group. Well, where's the balance between the group and the individual? Individual following with Aquarius. And sometimes when we are trying to liberate and decondition and individualize, what happens? We get beat up. We get pushed back down. We get made fun of. We stick out. We get ridiculed. And so there's all kinds of things that happen when you don't conform. And you get hurt. And if it's extreme, and we have all these extremes, and Aquarius being in a square between Scorpio and polarity, if we have sexual abuse and it falls into Aquarius in the 11th, when you see planets there and you see Venus in Aquarius or the 11th, this could be somebody who has suffered some type of abuse in some way. We haven't even touched upon a lot of those distortions, and that abuse can exist in so many of these different archetypes. But the Aquarian archetype will relate to what we call trauma, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, and so what can happen with it being fixed air is it gets paralyzed. I can't move. I'm so everything. And what will happen with Venus in Aquarius or the 11th, another distortion of that, is they're frozen, fixed. You know, they're afraid to move because they've had so much rug pulled out underneath them, square from Scorpio, okay, and square from Taurus. They don't know where security is anymore, and so they're afraid to move. They're afraid to do anything. They're afraid to engage in life. Venus attracting in what I need. So they'll be in their head, I don't need anything. I'll just satisfy it in my mind. It's another one of those very interesting archetypes. And those of you who have the Pluto Volume 2 on relationships, Jeffrey spends many pages going through Venus in Aquarius or the 11th. To explain all of this. It's basically about being frozen in their needs and needing to liberate, needing to get in touch with Leo, what works for me, and being a group of one, being in my own needs versus what my partner thinks I need, or my family, or the group, or my friends, or anybody else thinks I need. Healthy Venus in Aquarius in the 11th house, have the courage to be that group of one. Have the courage to go. These are my values, and these are my needs, and this is what I'm going to live. Did you have a question?
When you've been speaking about the archetypes, you say, okay, if you have Venus in Aquarius in the 11th, but many people don't have their signs and their houses lined up.
Mm-mm.
So you're seeing if it's in either one. So then when it's obviously for most people going to be in different ones, do you blend?
You have to blend two archetypes. Yep.
Okay.
Yes. So if you have Venus in Aquarius and it's in the 10th house, you have to blend the archetypes of Aquarius in the 10th. If you have Venus in Aquarius and you've got it in the 8th house, you've got to blend the archetypes of Venus in Aquarius and Venus in Scorpio. Each of you are having to blend two of these 12 archetypes that we've walked through. And my apologies that we've spent so much time going into this education where we're not allowing ourselves enough. I thought I'd go through this stuff much faster. Moon in Taurus. So my apologies that we're not moving through this material much faster so that we're learning to blend this. We can go into, I will go fast. I'm not even going to go through Mars and the archetypes. I'll explain Mars and I'll explain Mars retrograde. And then we can start, we'll finish up with whatever time we have left with just starting to blend some of these basic archetypes of the duality of Venus in two of these archetypes, okay, and Mars in two of these archetypes. Venus in Pisces, or the 12th. man, these are the Florence Nightingales of the zodiac. These are the sensitives of the zodiac. We are passive, mutable water. I mean, all three of those words is passive, attracting it in. Mutable, going with the flow. Water. I mean, Venus in Pisces needs a container. Venus in Pisces, or the 12th house. I mean, these are some of the most sensitive souls in the zodiac. Pisces is the last archetype. So Pisces energy in the 12th house contain every archetype that came before it. And you want to talk about Libra being a chameleon, try working with Piscean or 12th house or Neptune energy. What part of myself would you like me to adapt, pretend to be? And the sincerity of it is Pisces in the 12th, or Venus in Pisces or the 12th, it has all kinds of needs and feelings. It can understand everybody else's needs and feelings. It's just so sensitive. It can be everywhere and anywhere and take anything in. And that can be the distortion of Venus in Pisces or the 12th. No healthy boundaries. So the Virgo polarity point, or the 6th house polarity point, is facing the realities in life versus just floating in la-la land. You know, Venus in Pisces or the 12th can go for the substances, the addictions, because reality, Virgo 6, is too hard to take. And Venus in Pisces or the 12th, when they start evolving, are learning how to replace a relationship with source energy for these substances. Learning how to replace the worst distortions of Virgo in Pisces or the 12th are looking for the partner to be the de facto god, goddess, rather than Virgo polarity recognizing the partner is a human being as well. So there can be many unconscious projections when Venus is in the 12th or Pisces. And then they face the polarities of reality shocks when the partner is not ideal, when the partner's flesh and blood. Venus in Pisces or the 12th, I mean, they can be the healers of the zodiac, but they have to heal themselves first. And they have to adopt their own values and needs rather than everybody else's. They're very idealistic people, and they get disillusioned by reality within themselves when they can't live up to their own ideals within their value systems. They have to create values that are based upon reality. And they can get very disillusioned with the partner who disappoints them because they can't be ideal. They haven't reached perfection yet. So, apologies for taking so long to go through the zodiac. Now, how do we blend these two? Just very briefly, okay? We got Venus in Gemini, and it's in the 7th house. There's Gemini in Libra. Whenever it's a house, find the sign that it relates to, and then blend the two. If you have Venus in Gemini in the 7th house, so that's going to blend the Venus in Gemini and Libra archetype. You see where you got a double air sign? You see where you have somebody who can be, you start to put these together. Venus, you got somebody who can be very flexible. Gemini, Libra, 2 air signs. Air is always willing to entertain different ideas so they can entertain different values and all that type of stuff. You got Venus in Gemini in the 7th house. You can have somebody who can always be considering everybody else's ideas and values rather than their own. You could have somebody who is, you know, going with whatever values are in the moment, rather than opposite of Gemini is Sag, opposite of Libra, the 7th, is the 1st. Rather than intuiting Sag, 9th, what works for them, Aries 1st. Okay? So when you start taking Venus in a house and a sign, you're going to look at that natal house and sign as where you're coming from past life orientation. You're going to look at that polarity point as the balance or the polarity or the rest of the information that you need to know to put things in perspective to evolve the natal archetype. Okay? So Venus and Gemini in the 7th would have to look over to Sagittarius in the 1st and blend those two archetypes for that perspective, that polarity of information to metamorphose the natal archetype. Understanding this? Somebody quickly throw out your Venus in sign and house. Anybody?
Venus and Scorpio in the 2nd.
Venus and Scorpio in the 2nd. Did anybody catch that one? What are we talking about? We're putting Scorpio in the 2nd house, the Taurus house. It's the opposite. Here's something that I was asked on a break that I'll relate for everybody now. When you have a Libra rising, sometimes a Virgo rising, every once in a while a Scorpio rising, but typically Libra risings, you've got the sign in the opposite house. So there you've got to weigh those two. In evolutionary astrology, when you have signs in their opposite houses, typically a Libra rising again, we call this the emotional paradox. It's a back and forth between one and the other and one and the other. The emotional paradox, and you'll know this by a Libra rising, and I got Aries on the descendant, you have a desire for freedom, Aries, 1st house, and a desire for commitment, relationships, Libra and the 7th. And the emotional paradox is that these are souls that tend to go back and forth between one and the other. I want my freedom, no, I want commitment. No, I want my freedom, no, I want commitment. And what they have to learn is to blend the polarity. We need both freedom and commitment. So Venus and Scorpio, there's all that intensity and magnetism that comes through with Venus and Scorpio, but we put it in the 2nd house. Okay, I'm going to learn how to magnetize me to myself, to be flippant. But Venus in Taurus and Venus in the 2nd house, okay, this is very much relating to, remember what we said about the 2nd house in Taurus? I want my possessions, I want my things, I want to be secure in my values and needs. But we put Scorpio into the mix, and Scorpio, you know, is those famous confrontations and upsets that'll come through on emotional levels. And we got someone going back and forth with emotional intensity, Venus and Scorpio, yet they want stability, Venus in the 2nd house. So that's when we put Venus and Scorpio and the 2nd, that emotional paradox now starts to come back and forth between Taurus and Scorpio. So what will happen with this Venus placement typically is they're very secure, and then an emotional upheaval will come along to change the landscape. And every time that emotional upheaval, Scorpio, comes along and removes Venus in the 2nd house, outer possessions or the relationship in some way, is to get us to go from the outer levels of security to the inner levels of security. You able to follow me in my languaging just through the basics of these archetypes well enough? Again, lots more I could say. I'm just trying to give snapshots of this. Give me another Venus house sign.
Leo in the 6th.
Venus and Leo in the 6th. Okay? Again, it doesn't matter which way you start, whether you start with Leo or you start with 6th. You can do either one. Okay? Remember all the Venus in Leo? Who's going to love me? You put it in the 6th house, I'm never perfect enough for somebody else to love me. What's the polarity of that one? The polarity of Venus and Leo is Aquarius, being able to detach and objectify that statement, who's going to love me? Well, okay, how can I learn how to love myself? That's an Aquarius Leo thing, okay, that detachment, okay. It's not always about finding that person who will meet my needs. It can be me learning how to meet my own needs, Aquarius to Leo. You put it in the 6th house and it's Pisces, or it's the 12th house, and you've got to learn to go, well, who is perfect? Well, you know, aren't we all trying to figure out how to get our own needs met? Are we all trying to find somebody how to meet our needs? So Venus in Leo in the 6th is going to have to go, you know, I'm just going to have to learn how to love myself. And the better that I learn how to love myself and be gentle and forgiving with myself, the more attractive I'm going to be to the partners who are out there. Following this? In how I'm saying this? Both the natal house sign blend, and you can look into that polarity house sign blend as we're going through that. Okay, one more. Venus in Libra in the 6th. Okay, this would be a good one. Venus and Leo in the 6th. Who is going to love me? Put Venus in Libra in the 6th house. Oh, I am just going to figure out how to meet my partner's needs so well that I know he is just going to give back to me everything that I need. And then when I'm giving to the partner, Libra, I'm giving to the partner, and he's not meeting my needs, and he's not meeting my needs, well, I'm going to flip over to the opposite side of Libra, and I'm going to start withholding on my giving, and I'm going to start speaking up 6th house and saying, I'm not going to do that for you unless you do this for me. Another Libra in the 6th. Getting this? Okay. So what's the polarity? The polarity of that is Aries 12. So the Aries polarity, as we're figuring out what I need and what's important to me and what I value, I'm going to have to do something about really learning how to take care of my own needs. And I'm going to have to learn that 12th house polarity then of that is I'm going to have to learn how to be forgiving of my partner, because it's not my partner's responsibility to be responsible for my needs, it's me. So I learn how to be forgiving of my partner, forgiving of myself, back to the 6th house, learn how to have healthy giving and receiving. Another archetype of Libra is when we're into that giving and receiving and we're into the needy side of Libra, and if I just give a little more and give a little more and give a little more and give a little more, Libra has to learn that when it gives and it doesn't receive back in kind, to stop giving. Libra is learning when to give and when not to give. Okay? So that Libra and the Venus and Libra in the 6th, when it goes over into that Aries 12th polarity, I'm going to learn that on the ultimate levels, 12th house, I've got to meet my own needs. To the degree I do that, I minimize it to my partner. And when I minimize those needs with my partner, Libra 6th, I learn more and more healthy balance of giving and receiving with my partner. I learn healthy boundaries of giving and receiving with my partner. Again, this is just Venus. And I apologize to all the Mars retrogrades, and let's see how fast I can do it. Again, we're not going to go through the archetypes. You've got the 12 archetypes. You can start applying Mars to them. But what is the archetype of Mars? Mars is that instinctive desire to become, to act upon the conscious desires that we find within our soul. Mars is always the leading edge of our desire nature. Remember Pluto, the soul, the dual desire nature of the soul to separate and return? It exists on a very unconscious level via Pluto. Pluto makes our desires conscious via Mars. That's why Mars is always that instinct to become. Mars is always that instinct to take action on our desires. And so we have a very interesting relationship between Mars and Pluto. That's a whole subject unto itself, just following the different aspects that Mars and Pluto can make to each other. But in essence, our soul, Pluto, makes our desires conscious via Mars. And so Mars is always the egocentric identification with our desire nature. If all of you take just a moment and think about what your current desires are, with Mars you can be conscious of those desires and know them in a process of becoming. Mars is the leading edge of our desire nature, is the leading edge of our separating desires. I want another desire, another desire, another desire. I want another kid, I want another lover, I want another job, I want another this, I want another that. Mars is going to be that leading edge of our desires, both separating and returning. So as we are evolving our soul and we start to exhaust the separating desires, Mars is the leading edge of our desire nature, will be the leading edge of our returning desire to no source. Mars can be that desire or impulse that can lead us towards something that is all about reconnecting with the spiritual side of ourself, to know God, Goddess, Great Spirit, whatever it is. So Mars is the leading edge of the desires, is both, again, separating and returning. And so we know Mars is that instinctive action to become. Well, become what? Become whatever our soul is identifying as a desire within itself that the ego can relate to. Understanding this? This is some of the deeper desires of Mars. And because I'm getting to the end of the day, I'm referring to my notes because I don't want to miss anything. Yep, nope. Pretty much, yep. Talking about most of these, yeah. Mars is, again, that instinct to act out whatever the desires of the soul are. So as we take Mars through the cycle of the zodiac, and Mars has a 2-year, actually a 26-year cycle, synodic cycle, when it comes back from its relationship with the sun. It's 26 months instead of 24. But as Mars takes 2 years more or less to cycle through the zodiac, we go through a complete evolution of our desires. Our desire nature and acting out on our desires has a tendency to run in 2-year cycles. That's the Mars timing. Mars doesn't make any nice, neat, 5-pointed star like Venus does. Mars is fairly erratic in that, in coming back to the same spot. It doesn't have anything that's a real nice rhythm to it. So we know Mars basically through its 2-year cycle. And Mars only goes retrograde within that 2 years once. So the Mars retrograde cycle works on an every other year basis. The outer planets, Jupiter through Pluto, go retrograde once a year, anywhere from 4 to 5 months. Jupiter, Saturn, 4 months. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, 5-month retrograde cycles. Mercury, most people learn about Mercury. Mercury goes retrograde 3-4 times a year for 3 weeks each time. Venus and Mars have the rarest of the 2 retrogrades. So Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years, approximately 2.5 months. And when Mars has a retrograde cycle, it ends up spending 7 to 8 months in one sign. Or if it's retrograde is crossing over 2 signs of the zodiac, 7 to 8 months in 2 signs of the zodiac. So that really stretches it out. Venus retrograde will end up 4 or 5 months approximately in one sign. Mars will end up 7 to 8 months in one sign. So wherever those Mars retrogrades are, you talk about really getting in touch with the archetype of that sign and how it affects our desire nature. That's a long time for Mars to be in a sign of the zodiac when it likes to just buzz right through everything because of its natural rulership of Aries. And I'm looking for my notes. I know where it is. I have it on another sheet. The next Mars retrograde that we're going to have, hold on a second, I've got, thank you, December 20th, 21st at 1942 Leo, and it goes direct March 10th of 2010, and it will go direct at 0 degrees 18 minutes Leo. This particular Mars retrograde, on average, Mars is retrograde 2.5 months. This retrograde is 10 days shy of 3 months. We'll have Mars retrograde for almost 3 months. Here's the shadow, or Mars is in Leo from October 16th of 2009 to June 7th of 2010, 8 months. Yeah, so there's just some of the astronomy. I thought I had my Mars shadow. Hold on, I got my Mars shadow in here. The Mars shadow period begins when Mars first enters 0 degrees 18 minutes Leo, October 17th of 2009. Mars doesn't leave the shadow, or where it first turned retrograde, 19 Leo 42, until May 17th of 2010. So its shadow time period is just a little less than its transit. 0 degrees 18 minutes. Shadow ending 1942. If you catch that, the shadow ends at the point, the shadow begins at the point where Mars is going to go direct at the end of its retrograde. It's that first passage, retrograde passage, direct passage. Okay, follow with that?
And what was the date when it goes to 19 degrees?
It leaves its shadow May 17th of 2010, and that's when it'll be 19 Leo 42 after the retrograde. Yep. And so, again, Mars is an archetype that is a little less complicated to understand than Venus, because Venus has that dual relationship of Taurus and Libra. Mars rules Aries in the first house. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It's that instinct to become. It's that instinct to initiate. Now, the one thing that gets to be a little interesting about Mars is that because Mars is more, it's one of the inner planets, it's a conscious planet, whereas Pluto is the soul unconscious, Mars is the conscious desires of the soul, okay? We have an ability to be conscious of our desire nature, and yet Mars is the first sign, ruling the first sign, Aries, the first house. It's that instinctive beginning, the star bursting forth that needs the Libra 7th house reaction to learn and grow. So Mars is always wanting to impulsively act and move out there and grow and become and go after what it wants and desires. And this is true whether it's women or men. We all have that Mars instinct to become, okay, with us. This creates a little bit of interesting energy in that I'm wanting to become, this is what I want in the moment. Okay, I do this moment, I get a reaction to it, so then I go on to the next moment. And so Mars in Aries in the first house learns through action, reaction, action, reaction, action, reaction. That's typical with Martian energy. Now, it will get tempered through the various archetypes of the zodiac, the 12 signs and houses. But that Martian energy is still there to act, react, act, react. Now, when Mars goes retrograde, and again, we had 4 people who had Mars retrograde natally, okay? When you have Mars retrograde in the birth chart, that means that you have spent previous past lives impulsively moving forward to an extreme degree. You have not been able to really have any focus of that conscious desire nature. I want what I want, and I want when I want it. I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to do that. That Mars Aries energy to just impulsively act gets carried to an extreme, or it did in past lives. And so a natal Mars retrograde automatically says you're trying to shift the soul from impulsive action to more focused actions, to more considered action. A Mars retrograde is learning to think before it acts. Following this? Understand it making sense in regards to this? And so, you know, a Mars retrograde wants to rebel, and yet it's learning to have real considered action about when and how to rebel, where to rebel, and where to just be able to go, wait a minute, I better think on this a little bit. And again, the details will be filled in by the house sign archetype in regards to that. I want to refer to my notes again because I got something on the tip of my tongue. I'm not as sharp as I was this morning. That instinctive energy to act outward with Mars retrograde now becomes an instinctive desire to return back to self. Okay? We're trying to come back to knowing ourselves and who we are and what desires we really want to act upon, rather just impulsively acting. It takes that, a Mars retrograde natally, takes all this Mars energy that's impulsive, and again, it slows it down. It's making it learn how to be considered actions rather than impulsive actions. Again, previous lives of just, no container whatsoever. Impulsiveness to a max, detailed by the sign in the house. And now Mars retrograde natally, or Mars going retrograde by progression in the current life, will then symbolize a need to slow down and take considered response and action into place. The soul learning how to have healthy use of active energy versus that impulsive use of it. Okay? Another thing about Mars retrograde is it can mean that you've had past life confrontations with authorities. It's a generic meaning of it, detailed by house and sign as to what authorities. And so now you're learning how to have that balance with authorities. You're learning to, Mars ruling Aries first house, having a natural square to Capricorn in the 10th. You're learning how to have balance with authority figures rather than always just trying to confront, bust out, rebel for any reason. You have to learn how to have considered rebellion when you have Mars retrograde natally and or by progression. Okay? Another one. When we come to Venus, we've learned through Venus now that Venus is our values and our needs, including our sexual needs. Okay? Mars is how we will act upon those sexual needs. We all have that Venus side of sexuality which wants to attract in that partner. But Mars, in its relationship to sexuality, is how each of us wants to go out there and initiate sexuality ourselves. And again, tempered by each sign house blend. When Mars is retrograde, okay, it takes that whole sexual impulse and it also slows that down. And a typical thing with the Mars retrograde natally or by progression is it can make the sexual behavior erratic. I want it, lost it. Sexual drive's there, goes. Okay? Another typical thing with Mars retrograde natally or by progression is this erraticness will be the heating up and feeling the sexual urge, and I just got to deal with it, and then it just dissipates. And that dissipation is most naturally expressed through the releasing of the urge. So a Mars retrograde has to learn how to be okay with masturbation. Because that erraticness of sexuality for a natal Mars retrograde or a progressed Mars retrograde, you know, our partner is not always there to satisfy the Mars retrograde native on demand. So when it's not appropriate, you know, again, learning considered action. That Mars retrograde can't be up there and just, you know, demand, partner, I want sex, I need it, I've heated up. You know, they have to learn how to then learn how to satisfy that urge, need themselves. And so when you're married to somebody or you're in relationship with somebody who is a natal Mars retrograde or it's there by progression, you have to learn to recognize that energy within them. And it becomes important for the partner to not take it as a judgment or a rejection, or to be open and willing if that Mars retrograde native, you know, all of a sudden has the instinctive impulse. Because again, the energy of Mars is to just instinctively act out in the moment. And Mars retrograde is teaching it how to have considered energy. So it's learning how to restrain oneself with that energy. So that erratic sexual behavior of Mars, if the partner's understanding, then the partner can be okay if all of a sudden it's the Mars native says, okay, are you ready? I'm ready.
I just needed the time.
Oh.
Through all of this, does anyone actually learn, like what happens when someone learns all of this in their chart? Do they just kind of balance out in their lives, or does these traumas and whatnot keep repeating no matter
evolving.
what?
It keeps evolving. And as you learn these archetypes, you know, the thing that you've learned with any of these planetary archetypes in any of astrology is you evolve the chart, but you really don't let go of the chart you incarnated with. You know, another typical thing that you can hear from cookbooks or that you will hear from souls that don't have an in-depth understanding of astrology, oh, I'm beyond my chart. I'm sorry, but the most evolved souls that I've encountered on the planet are not beyond their chart. They evolve the archetypes. What they do is they start minimizing the distortions and finding it easier and easier to go through the natural expressions. Okay? Myself as an example, I have Moon in Scorpio, the emotional nature, the self-image. That Moon in Scorpio is in the 10th house. I grew up in a family where it was suppressed. The emotional outbursts were not allowed unless it was the parent. Over the last year, I've had Neptune in Aquarius in my first house, making a first quarter square to that moon. I knew it was coming. I know what it involves, and I'm still having to live through it. And bless my husband, because he's been able to go, you've been so emotionally suppressed, Moon in Scorpio 10th, that Neptune in the first in Aquarius is about giving yourself permission to emotionally let it out. And I have been. And it doesn't matter whether it's raging or crying or being the clown in front of class. you know, that emotional freedom, Neptune first house, that's just had to be able to bust out. Now, I've been studying astrology for 25 years. So the point is that we don't balance out to become null and void. We're still living beings. We evolve the archetypes. We minimize the upsets, or we have a quicker way of getting to understanding of the upsets. And then understanding that, we can process through a little bit easier, faster, to then move into those natural expressions of it. The natural expression in my case is like, oh, I get to be impulsive emotionally. And I get to give myself permission, first house, to have all these emotions that can flip the, switch in a moment, and rather than trying to push that emotion down because it's not socially acceptable, or push that emotion down because I'm not allowed to do it in my family of origin. I have 2 sisters, and they've had to put up with my emotional upsets, and one sister in particular, things that I would never express to her emotionally, even with my wisdom and my understandings. And I finally said, it don't matter. I get to live too. And I've been able to express some things to this sister that created some pretty big upsets in the family. But after the storm calmed down, it made for another level of ease in the relationship. So we just keep spiraling these archetypes into greater and greater expansions of understanding them and living through them. And those of you who are studying astrology and wanting to be budding astrologers and work with clients, this is the most wonderful thing you can do. I put my prejudices right out there. I think that being a counseling astrologer, and especially a counseling evolutionary astrologer, is one of the greatest gifts we could give to the planet. What could be better than understanding who you are and taking out conditionings and judgments and going, we're not perfect here. Perfection is the process. It's why we keep incarnating all the time, and you help somebody understand themselves. All of you, go for it with whatever you've been able to take in these little tidbits today. And I'm sorry I didn't get through half again as much information. So, Mars retrograde. Other questions? We understanding a little bit of this Mars retrograde? So when we see Mars retrograde natally in someone, or by progression, you're starting to learn more about this archetype. And then you do your own blending, again, with house, signs, and aspects. Beginners, even if you can't quite get to the aspects yet, look at the wealth of information you can get understanding a planetary principle, and then doing that dual blend of a house and sign. There's a you could study and write pages and pages and pages. And if you go into meditation, you could meditate. You could take each one of your planetary principles and you could meditate on nothing but that planet for an entire week. And just have it unfold. It still unfolds. What were we doing? Even this week on this trip, we can get in the busyness of our lives. And so we were able to take a road trip together and travel in the car for a while. And Leroy's driving, and I get out the laptop, and we're looking at some charts, and we're going, oh, wow, I didn't know this. I never thought of that this way. The intuition was sparking, and 25 years later, I'm not bored yet. So anyway, I'm just trying to give examples. So when Mars goes retrograde by transit, then we're all going through this stuff. When Mars goes retrograde by transit, then all of us are having to slow down impulsiveness, slow down our energy. Instead of energy moving outward, when Mars is retrograde, that energy turns inward. And can you see how that can start to lead to frustration? When Mars is retrograde, everybody talks about Mercury retrograde, and when you have Mercury a half a degree from your sun, and a half a degree from Neptune, and sandwiched in between the two, you can experience Mercury retrograde. Even as much as I know about Mercury retrograde, here I am again, 25 years later with it in my chart. But Mars retrograde, for most people, is the most frustrating retrograde. It's the hardest retrograde to live through. For 2.5 months, we're asked to slow down and go inward and think about what it is that's important to us. And a Mars retrograde, Mars initiates the planets outside the boundaries of Earth. And so Mars through Pluto retrogrades always will occur when the Sun and the planet is opposite each other with Earth sandwiched in between, okay? And those Mars through Pluto retrogrades, the planet is closest to Earth. And so we really feel that energy. And when a planetary Mars through Pluto retrograde, its highlight of its retrograde cycle is its opposition to the Sun. That's when the Sun is shining the light of day on this retrograde planet. That's different than Mercury and Venus retrogrades. They're still conjunctions, okay? It's almost too much detail. I'm going to bring this back to Mars and focus in on this. Whenever Mars goes retrograde, you are trying to reevaluate the desires of the soul. You are trying to redo or re-experience or get clarity on how it is you want to go forward with life. Now this upcoming Mars retrograde that's going to happen in Leo, Mars in Leo, Leo's creativity. Remember that creative self-actualization? This is what I want to do with my life. This is what I want to create. These are my desires. Leo has some area on how it wants to focus all that fiery energy. And so Mars in Leo, when it comes along throughout the course of this fall and winter, it's going to be even a more frustrating retrograde than normal because, again, Mars rules Aries, fire sign. Mars retrograde in Leo, fire sign. Fire. Anybody just look at the archetype of fire. I want to explode. I want to transform. Fire never sits still. You ever seen fire just kind of, that flame? I mean, you see it's just always going. So when Mars goes retrograde in Leo, I mean, we're just going to really have to be very nice and gentle with ourselves. And Mars retrograde in Leo points to Aquarius. What's going to happen is Mars in Leo, this is what I want, this is how I want to do it, don't fence me in. And that polarity point over there, Aquarius, is going to say, wait a minute, Mars, slow down, look at the larger picture. You must consider the larger group, be it your family, be it your community, be it the planet, be it your spiritual religious group, whatever group Aquarius is for you. Mars, you have to slow down. I know that, this is the typical thing with Leo. It's the distortions of Leo will sometimes be called the starving artist syndrome. Any of you who are Pluto and Leo generation, you came here to be creative to the depth of your soul, and so you get that Aquarian polarity as your generational lesson. You can be as creative as you want, but your creativity must serve a social function, Aquarius, or nobody is going to care. Everybody will ignore you, the starving artist. And so this is what's going to happen when Mars goes retrograde in Leo.
If you can just please repeat that, it must serve a
Social need,
social need.
a social function.
Can't just be for you.
Our creativity can't just be for ourselves. If our creativity doesn't serve a social purpose, Aquarius, the rest of the world, Aquarius, will ignore us, Leo. You guys who are Pluto and Leos, you've been learning this your entire life. You can relate to that. So you're going to relate to Mars in this Mars retrograde coming up in Leo. And again, it's going to be from 0 to 20 degrees Leo. So it's going to cover 2/3 of you. Mars in Leo, or Pluto in Leo, 1937, 38, 39 through 1956, 57. So all of those of you born from the late 1930s, probably all the way through to 1950, 48, 49, 50. And all of you born through the 1940s, this Mars retrograde cycle in Leo is going to be back and forth over your natal Pluto 3 times. So it's going to force you to get that Aquarian objectivity lesson to the depth of your soul, Pluto in Leo. That will be your transit. But from 0 to 20 degrees Leo. Those are the degrees Mars is going to cover 3 times with its retrograde cycle. Those of you born in the late 30s to the early 40s, it will go retrograde on your natal Pluto. Those of you born in the late 40s, early 50s, it's going to go direct on your natal Pluto. Okay? But all of us are going to feel it. We all have Leo in one of the houses of our chart. That's where Mars is going to slow down 3 times. And that's where Mars is going to slow down and transit 3 times. And that's the area of creativity we're just going to want to bust out in, whether it's the 5th house of a new lover, or it's the 6th house of our job, or it's the 10th house of career and responsibilities. Mars in Leo is going to have us wanting to go outward in those directions, and we're going to have to go over to the polarity point Aquarius, detach, see the larger picture, and then Aquarius, when it's detached and gotten the larger picture, has to come back into Leo and live for us, for ourselves.
What about the natal Mars and Leo types?
Natal Mars in Leo types.
Yeah, like when the retrograde, like how might that frustrate them?
The natal Mars in Leo, when you have natal Mars in Leo or the 5th house, your desire nature, Mars, came here to be creative, came here to be noticed, came here to fulfill that special sense of destiny and creativity you have. So when Mars is going through that, those natal Mars and Leos are going to have a Mars return, which you do every 2 years, okay? But it's going to slow it down, and it's going to have you really focus on what is important to act upon. And you're going to have to reach over to that polarity point Aquarius to really get the broadest view to then come back into those personal desires and activate them. Mars in the 5th will start to feel it the same. You won't have it 3 times, but you will. Mars in the 5th will still feel it. So it's just going to slow down, acting upon the desires and manifesting the desires to get clarity on what you really do desire. Okay? Put Mars in relationships. I can tell, I'll pay attention and try and get these questions. Did you?
You know what, I just because I know someone who's has Mars in Leo right on their ascendant, and this Mars retrograde's going to go right over it. What might you think?
Okay, so you've got you got a Leo.
I don't, but I know
someone who has a Leo ascendant, and the Mars is going to go back and forth over it.
And they have Mars in Leo on the ascendant.
On the ascendant. Ooh, ooh. I would tell them a lot of cardiovascular workouts so they don't have a heart attack. Mars rules. Leo rules. Leo rules the heart. Okay, so they need to pay attention to that. I would also tell them, perhaps a lot of sexual release for all that frustration that builds up. Frustration, Aries, 1st house, Leo, 5th house, fiery energy. It just wants to burst out, and Mars retrograde is going to slow it down and contain it. They've got to have a release valve. Got to there must be for the tape. For the tape, the student said, no wonder he's phoning. Oh, I'm supposed to do this. They must have a release valve. We'll all need a release valve with Mars retrograde in Leo. Okay, whether that release is sexual or it's a cardiovascular workout or it's a long walk in the woods or the mountaintop, whatever it is, Mars retrograde in any sign, the energy builds up and it's got to have a relief valve. Mars retrograde natally, periodically, again, erratic energy, it builds up, must have a release valve, whatever you want to call it. Relief valve. Okay, so let's, oh gosh, we're 10 to 5? Oh,
I just wanted to ask you, if you naturally have Mars in Pisces, I'm seeing my husband retrograde, naturally, then is it like having it go over it 6 times then?
no, doesn't go over it 6 times. No, no. You have a husband who has Mars in Pisces, and it's retrograde. Okay, we won't even take the house in. We'll just go Mars in Pisces. Can you see Mars rules Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, and don't fence me in, just instinctively acting. By the time Mars goes all the way around the zodiac and it gets into Pisces, Mars in Pisces is just such watery, floaty energy. It's Neptune and Mars, okay? And so that Mars energy becomes very sensitive. It's like Venus in Pisces. These are sensitive souls. And if it's retrograde, that means that sensitivity has been hurt in past lives. That Mars retrograde natally in Pisces will just tell us that we have a soul that's been wounded in previous actions. Okay? And so it's needing to go over to that Virgo polarity point and look at it realistically. I'm not a victim. Okay? Learning how Mars in Pisces, it's learning how to feel its way through the actions, okay? And that Virgo polarity point, helps it realistically look at all of these actions that it's having to redo Mars retrograde in this life. A Mars retrograde in Pisces, they have to be careful of not re-imprinting that sense of victimization. That makes sense for hubby?
Yep.
5 minutes on the tape? I so apologize for not getting as far along as I have wanted to. I probably have half again as much material. And I thought I would just bebop-de-deep-deep buzz right through. So I sincerely hope that this has been satisfying for you guys. And we didn't do much chart examples. I sincerely hope that you've been able to learn a lot through the archetypes that you can then practice on your own and apply to your own studies with that. Final questions? Hold on, Sandra, I'm going to run.
This is just a miscellaneous question, but in our society these days, there seems to be so much crime and whatever, abuse of property, you name it. And where is that coming from? Is that?
That's the distortions of patriarchal principles from natural law. Again, as I said way back at the beginning, when we used to live more closely aligned with natural spiritual laws and principles, when this sexual impulse came up, it's a very creative energy. Creates babies. It creates orgasms. It creates all kinds of stuff. When religions uprose and said, "Thou shalt not have sex," it became suppressed. Anything natural that's suppressed becomes distorted and comes out weird. Wars, rapes, murders. So all of the woundedness, and let's look, for instance, young teenage males. If you want to go back far enough, when the puberty used to arise, your young males were initiated into sacred sexual acts, so that hormonal energy that started coming out had a natural expression. There used to be ancient ceremonies to initiate them into being young men. And so there were natural ways to release that sexual urge. Now it is so distorted. It's either glamorized with Hollywood, or I like to look at, and I'm not the person who invented this, I don't even know who did, but gangs, that's just our young males trying to recreate all their ritual bondings. Okay, I mean it's a vast subject. You can study it. One of the best books for studying that is Brianne Eisler's The Chalice and the Blade. Anybody familiar with that book? Fantastic book for understanding how we got distorted away from the chalice and we took up the blade. How we learned how to destroy each other rather than love each other. Rianne, R-I-A-N-N-E, Eisler, E-I-S-L-E-R. I'm a firm believer in that cliche, make love, not war. If we made more love, we wouldn't have as much war. I'm also a firm believer in allowing women to have their chance to run countries. Men have had their chance. Let's have a few more women. Might negotiate a little better. You know, you ever seen that saying about the 3 wise women? If we had 3 wise women at the birth of Jesus instead of 3 wise men, they would have brought a casserole. They would have asked for directions. They, you know, all. I mean, there's a real. I don't remember the saying. I don't have that one memorized. But you know, they. Anyway, and again, I'm not into gender prejudice. This is all about the balance of matriarchy, patriarchy. Okay. With that, because we've all been male, we've all been female. So I got a 1-minute thing on the tape, so I just want to bring the tape to closure for all of you. I thank you very, very much for inviting me. I had fun. I hope you had as much fun as I did. And I hope that the information that you did receive was worthwhile for you. And helpful for you. And I wish you all much, much success on your astrological studies, and I wish you all the energy and belief in yourself to become astrologers. We need